All right, so welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be checking out Cheap ABA, a website with like tons of resources for, the autism community. But there's kind of a twist. We're going to zero in on this idea they have about like radical self-love.
Yeah, that's a pretty interesting concept, isn't it?
It really
It
is.
makes you think, what does it actually mean to,
Yeah.
to really love yourself when you've maybe kind of felt your whole life that you need to fit in, right? Like fit into a world that wasn't really made for you.
Totally. And the website kind of emphasizes this thing that the autism spectrum is like so diverse,
Yeah, absolutely.
and they don't like this idea of levels or functioning
Right,
labels.
they're really pushing back against that. It's more about the individual.
Yeah.
Like everyone's experience with autism is going to be different.
And that's what I thought was really interesting in their stuff. Like the emphasis on individual experience
Yep.
makes you realize how many people, especially women, might be dealing with like a late diagnosis,
Absolutely.
Can you imagine finally understanding yourself, all your struggles, all your strengths, but it's like decades later.
Right. It can really change how you see yourselves, like profoundly.
Yeah.
And the website even talks about how this late diagnosis thing,
Yeah.
it can actually make like the journey to radical self-love even more complicated
Oh, interesting.
because you have so many people who spend years, you know, masking consciously or unconsciously, but like
I
they're suppressing their autistic traits
Yeah.
to fit in.
Right. Trying to fit in.
Cheap ABA, actually, they had this one blog post and they describe it as trying to squeeze yourself into a neurotypical costume,
Oh, wow.
which I thought was really powerful. It really
Yeah.
shows, what a toll masking takes
Hmm.
on mental health
Yeah.
and how important it is to just like embrace who you actually are.
It's such a good analogy, that costume thing. It really, it just drives home the point that masking isn't a long-term solution. It's like, it's just this temporary fix, right?
Right.
And it can lead to you feeling exhausted, and like disconnected from who you really are.
Totally.
But before we get too deep into like the whole self-love aspect, I'm kind of curious about the organization behind all of this.
Yeah.
Cheap ABA. I mean, it's a pretty bold name, isn't it?
Yeah, it definitely gets your attention. But when you look a bit closer, you see their mission is really about making applied behavioral analysis therapy, ABA, more affordable,
Oh, okay.
accessible,
Makes sense.
and it's often really expensive, that kind of therapy.
Yeah.
And they're saying, look, cost shouldn't be something that prevents people from getting support.
I see.
But what's interesting is they go beyond just ABA therapy.
Okay.
They're talking about sensitivities, relationships, social situations, all kinds of things.
So it's a more holistic approach.
Yeah.
To supporting the autistic community, not just focused on therapy.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's where this emphasis on radical self-love comes in. It's about giving people the tools, the mindset to navigate the world in a way that's authentic and with confidence.
Okay, so we've talked about like the organization and how they do things a bit differently, but what does radical self-love actually mean, like in the context of autism?
Well, they present it as, I guess you could say, like a complete shift in how you see yourself.
Okay.
It's not just about accepting you're autistic. It's more about like actively celebrating it.
Wow.
Cheap ABA talks about like rejecting the shame and the stigma that society often attaches to autism,
Yeah.
and replacing it with pride in your neurodiversity.
So instead of seeing your autism as something to hide or overcome, you're embracing it like as a core part of who you are.
Yeah, exactly. And what's really fascinating is that they connect this whole concept of radical self-love to all sorts of benefits,
Okay. Like what?
like less anxiety, less stress,
Oh, wow.
more self-acceptance, and stronger relationships, more authentic relationships.
Wait, hold on. So they're saying just by loving yourself, by embracing your autism, you can actually like see real improvements in your mental health and your relationships.
Yeah, that's what they're saying.
That's a pretty big claim.
It is. But when you think about it, it makes sense.
Yeah.
If you're constantly trying to like fit into some mold or hide who you are, masking all the time, it takes a toll.
It's got to be exhausting.
And radical self-love, it kind of frees you from that pressure,
Mhm.
so you can focus on what actually matters, like your well-being and the people you care about.
Okay, that's a really compelling argument, but it also brings up a bunch of questions, right?
Hmm.
Like how do you actually do this? How do you cultivate this radical self-love? What does it even look like in real life? I'm
Yeah.
guessing Cheap ABA has some ideas about that.
Oh, yeah. They break it down into some really practical steps.
Okay, great.
And it all starts with, self-reflection,
Yeah.
figuring out what your strengths are, what you're passionate about, even the things that maybe you used to see as like deficits.
Okay.
They want you to like identify and celebrate what makes you unique, even if it doesn't fit the usual mold.
So instead of trying to fit in, you're like celebrating what makes you stand out.
Exactly.
That's a really empowering message, especially for people who've spent years trying to blend in.
Yeah, for sure. And it's not just about knowing your strengths, it's also about understanding what you need.
Okay.
Like cheap ABA really emphasizes self-care, but self-care that's tailored to you, to your sensory preferences, to your energy levels.
Hmm.
It's not one size fits all. It's about like honoring what works for you.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, if you're always pushing yourself to be what other people consider normal,
Yeah.
you're probably ignoring your own needs, right?
Yeah, totally. It's like trying to wear someone else's shoes.
Exactly.
Uncomfortable. Not going to work long term.
Not at all.
And speaking of finding the right fit, they also talk about um, how important community and support are,
Yeah, that makes sense.
like connecting with other autistic people online, in person, it doesn't matter. But it gives you this sense of belonging,
Yeah,
and validation, which you don't always get out there in the wider world.
for sure.
It's like a space where you can be yourself. You don't have to worry about judgment. You don't have to mask.
Yeah, I love that. Finding your tribe,
Yeah.
your people who just get it. It's like you can finally take off that neurotypical costume and just breathe. So we've covered like the basics of radical self-love, at least how Cheap ABA presents it, but I know they go way deeper on their site. What are some of the other interesting things they talk about that relate to this idea?
Well, one area they get into is the connection between autism and mental health.
Oh, okay.
They talk about the fact that autistic people experience things like anxiety, depression, even trauma at higher rates.
That's really important to talk about.
Yeah. And they also they dive into the impact of societal stuff
Okay.
like ableism and misogyny
Yeah.
and how those things can make the journey to self-love even harder.
So it's not just about how an individual sees themselves, it's about recognizing these like systemic barriers, these prejudices that autistic people face.
Exactly. And they don't avoid those tough conversations.
Right.
They also have resources, strategies for dealing with specific challenges
Okay.
like relationships, getting a job, sensory overload.
It's like they're providing a roadmap so people can not just survive, but actually thrive in a world that's not always, accommodating.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Okay, so we're just scratching the surface here. But I think we've got like a good foundation for understanding this whole concept of radical self-love,
Yeah,
at least in the context of autism.
right.
Before we move on to part two, what really stood out to you so far about Cheap ABA's take on this?
I think what struck me was just how practical they are about it.
Yeah.
They're not just promoting uh, this vague idea of self-love. They're giving people actual tools and resources to actually make it happen in their lives.
Yeah, I totally agree. And for me, it was their focus on challenging how we usually think about autism.
Yeah, for sure.
They're not asking people to change who they are to fit in. They're
Right.
they're saying embrace your strengths,
Yeah.
redefine what it means to be autistic. Yeah.
Exactly. And for our listeners, I want to leave you with this thought. Cheap ABA wants you to ask yourself, what's one part of your autistic experience, something you might have seen as a challenge or even a deficit that you can now reframe as a strength or something to be proud of?
That's a great question. And we'll be back in just a sec to dive even deeper into radical self-love. Don't go anywhere.
I'll be right back.
Okay, so welcome back to the deep dive. We're still kind of unpacking this idea of radical self-love from Cheap ABA, and I gotta say it's really making me rethink a lot of my own ideas about how we approach self-acceptance. What really hit me in the last part was their point about about community,
Yeah.
how crucial it is, especially when you're trying to unlearn years of like internalized ableism.
Yeah, that's such a key point, and it's something Cheap ABA really, really stresses. I mean, internalized ableism, it can be really sneaky, you know? It's like you take in all those negative messages, all the stuff that society throws at you about disability,
Right.
and then you kind of turn it inward. You start to believe it about yourself.
So instead of like fighting those biases, you end up kind of using them against yourself.
Exactly. And Cheap ABA gives this example of an autistic person who feels ashamed because they need routine
Yeah.
and predictability,
Okay.
and they think it makes them, rigid or inflexible.
Oh, I see.
But in reality, that's just how their brain works best. It's a need, not a flaw.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like saying like I'm broken because I need glasses to see.
Right, exactly.
That's a powerful way to put it. But how do you even start to unravel that? Years of internalized ableism. Where do you even begin?
Well, Cheap ABA, they say the first step is awareness.
Okay.
You have to recognize those thoughts, the negative ones, and then you have to ask yourself where are these coming from.
Mhm.
Are they based on my actual experiences?
Yeah.
Or are they based on what society says about autism?
Yeah.
And actually, they have this downloadable worksheet on their site.
Oh, cool.
It's got like a series of questions
Yeah.
to help you, really identify and then challenge those internalized beliefs.
So it's about like becoming aware of those scripts, those negative scripts that are running in your head, and then actually choosing to rewrite them.
Exactly.
Oh,
And a big part of that rewriting process is surrounding yourself with positive influences.
okay, yeah.
Cheap ABA actually has like a whole section dedicated to autistic role models.
Oh, nice.
Activists, artists, people who are really embracing their neurodiversity and showing everyone what it can look like.
Yeah, I love that. Seeing yourself reflected in other people who are thriving. It's like, hey, if they can do it, maybe I can too.
Exactly. And it's not just about, those external role models.
Right.
Cheap ABA also talks about connecting with other autistic people directly. Like they have a forum on their website
Oh,
where
cool.
people can share their experiences, support each other, just celebrate being autistic together.
Yeah, it creates that sense of community we were talking about before, a space where you feel like seen and understood. But what about the real world stuff? Like how does this radical self-love idea actually help you navigate a world that wasn't really designed for neurodiversity?
Right. And Cheap ABA acknowledges those challenges.
Okay.
They have articles about sensory overload, social anxieties, navigating relationships, finding work, a ton of practical strategies.
Can you give us some examples? I'm curious how they connect this radical self-love concept with actual like advice you can use.
Yeah, sure. One that really stood out to me was their approach to sensory overload. They suggest creating a sensory toolkit. It's
Yeah.
basically a personalized collection of things that can help you, regulate your sensory input.
Like what kind of things?
Well, it could be noise canceling headphones or fidget toys, maybe a weighted blanket, calming scents, whatever works for you.
So it's about taking charge of your sensory needs and finding what helps you feel grounded.
Yeah, and comfortable.
Yeah.
Without forcing yourself to put up with situations that are just overwhelming.
Exactly. And they're saying that advocating for your needs is a big part of radical self-love, right?
Yeah, it's about recognizing that your needs are valid
Mm.
and being able to communicate them to other people.
Which can be tough, I imagine, especially if you've spent years, masking, trying to blend in.
Absolutely. But Cheap ABA says it's not selfish, it's self-respect.
Okay.
And they have a whole section on assertive communication techniques
Oh, wow.
with actual scripts and
Yeah.
examples for how to advocate for yourself in different situations.
So instead of feeling like you have to like apologize for your needs, you're confidently expressing them and setting boundaries.
Exactly. And they also talk about social anxiety,
Yeah.
which a lot of autistic people experience.
Right.
They say you should try out different ways to connect with people. Find your own social rhythm, something that feels comfortable for you.
Okay. Yeah.
Maybe it's online communities or small groups or just, one-on-one interactions, but it's about finding what works for you.
Yeah.
Not forcing yourself into social situations that just leave you feeling drained.
I love that. It's about giving yourself permission to socialize in a way that feels good for you, that honors your energy and your preferences. But what about the more complicated stuff, like relationships, cheap ABA? They talk about finding partners who understand and accept your autism, but that's got to be tough, right?
Right, and they acknowledge that it's not always easy, but they offer some practical advice
Oh,
on communication and setting expectations. They even have a section about disclosing your autism to potential partners
oh wow.
with tips on when to have that conversation and how to have it.
So it's about being upfront, being authentic, finding someone who sees your autism not as like a problem, but as a part of who you are.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm guessing they have similar advice for navigating work.
I would assume so.
They do. They have a whole part on disclosing your autism to employers, asking for accommodations, advocating for yourself at work. But what I thought was interesting was they really emphasize exploring different career paths,
Oh, okay.
like self-employment or entrepreneurship. They
Interesting.
say for a lot of autistic people, that traditional 9 to 5 office environment, it can be really, really tough.
So instead of trying to fit into a system that doesn't work for you, you create your own path, your own structure. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and it ties back to this whole idea of radical self-love, right?
Yeah, I see that.
Recognizing your strengths, recognizing your needs,
Yeah.
and building a life that actually honors them. And they have stories on their site of autistic entrepreneurs who have found success and happiness by starting their own businesses, setting
Wow.
their own hours,
Yeah.
working in environments that play to their strengths.
That's really inspiring. It's a good reminder that there's not one right way to live or work, and that embracing your neurodiversity, it can open up all these unexpected opportunities.
For sure.
But I want to mention that cheap ABA doesn't shy away from the more complex parts of this whole journey, right?
Right.
They talk about how things like gender, race, sexual orientation, they can all have an impact on the experiences of autistic people.
That's a really important point. They have articles about the specific challenges that autistic women face.
Yeah.
They often get misdiagnosed or diagnosed later in life because of gender stereotypes. And they also discuss the experiences of autistic people of color
Right.
who face discrimination both within the autistic community and outside of it.
It's a reminder that radical self-love it's not just about embracing your autism, it's about embracing all of who you are, all your different identities.
Hmm.
But before we get into those complexities in part 3, what resonated most with you from this section?
I was really impressed by their practical approach to dealing with real world challenges. They're not just saying love yourself and everything will be fine. They're giving people actual tools and strategies to help them navigate, a world that wasn't always built with neurodiversity in mind.
Yeah, I agree, and for me, it was their emphasis on advocacy, not just advocating for your needs with other people, but advocating for yourself, recognizing your worth, and refusing to settle for anything less than respect and understanding.
Absolutely. And for our listeners, as you're thinking about all this, I want to leave you with this question from Cheap ABA.
Yeah.
What is one boundary you can set for yourself today that will honor your needs and create a more supportive environment for your well-being?
That's a powerful question, and we'll be right back for the final part of our deep dive into radical self-love. So so stick around. And we're back for the last part of our deep dive into this whole radical self-love thing with Cheap ABA as our guide. Right? We've talked about like the personal benefits, all the practical steps, but I'm kind of curious about the bigger picture.
Yeah.
Like what happens when this radical self-love idea starts to spread? Could it actually change how society sees autistic people, how they interact with them?
That's where it gets really I don't know, exciting, I guess.
Yeah.
Cheap ABA, they suggest that when more autistic people embrace who they are,
Yeah.
really own it, it starts to challenge all those stereotypes, all those misconceptions that people have about autism.
Right.
They have this quote on their site from an autistic activist. It says, when we stop trying to fit in, we force the world to expand.
Wow, I love that. So
Yeah.
so instead of asking autistic people to change to fit the existing norms, we're asking society to rethink those norms.
Exactly.
Yeah.
to make room for neurodiversity.
I like that.
Cheap ABA is saying that, radical self-love, it's not just about feeling good about yourself. It's about actually changing society.
Okay.
It's about shifting the focus away from fixing autistic people and instead creating a world where they can thrive as they are.
Okay, but let's be real for a second. We're talking about some pretty deep-seated beliefs here.
Right.
It's gonna take more than just a few people practicing self-love to change that.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's
Yeah.
a long-term thing.
Yeah.
But Cheap ABA talks about the power of visibility,
Okay.
of representation. They say it's really important for autistic people to share their stories, to advocate for what they need, to be present in all parts of society.
So it's about changing the narrative, not just for autistic individuals, but for everyone.
Exactly. And they have this whole section on their site called Autism in the Media.
Oh, interesting.
And they basically critique how autistic characters are usually portrayed in movies and TV.
Yeah, yeah.
And they're saying, look, authentic representation, it's crucial
Yeah.
if you want to break down stereotypes and really help people understand.
That makes sense. I mean, if all you're seeing are these stereotypical portrayals of autism,
Mhm.
you're not going to get the full picture, right?
Right. And they also talk about how important it is for autistic people to be involved in research and policy making, in advocacy work.
Yeah.
They believe that lived experience should be front and center
Mm.
in any conversations about autism.
So it's not just about changing how people see things. It's about giving autistic people a voice. Letting them shape the conversation about their own lives.
Yeah, exactly. And Cheap ABA,
Yeah.
actually, they take it even a step further.
Yeah.
They say neurodiversity isn't just something to put up with. It's something to celebrate.
Okay.
They talk about the strengths, the perspectives
Yeah.
that autistic people bring, the value of thinking differently.
Instead of seeing neurodiversity as like a bad thing, we can start to see it as an asset, right? A source of creativity, innovation.
Exactly. They actually have a blog post about autistic inventors and entrepreneurs, people who've used their unique ways of thinking to create incredible things. And they're saying, when we embrace neurodiversity, everyone wins.
So radical self-love it's not just a personal thing. It's a movement toward a more inclusive, a more equitable society.
That's the idea.
Mhm.
And while Cheap ABA focuses on autism, I think this concept of radical self-love, it's bigger than that.
Yeah.
It's about embracing who you are, no matter how you identify, no matter what challenges you face. It's about pushing back against those societal norms that tell you who you should be, how you should act.
Yeah, it's about recognizing that our differences, that's what makes us unique, what makes us human, and that embracing those differences in ourselves and in other people, that's what can make the world a better place.
I totally agree. And I think that's a great place to wrap things up. Cheap ABA wants to leave you, the listener, with this question. How can embracing your own true self help create a world that's more accepting, more inclusive for everyone?
That's a really good question to think about. And for those who want to keep exploring this idea, definitely check out the Cheap ABA website. They have a ton of resources, tons of information that can help you on your journey towards radical self-love.
And remember, it's a journey,
Mm.
not a destination.
Yeah.
So be patient with yourself. Celebrate your progress, and never be afraid to challenge those norms that try to put you in a box.
That's great advice. Well, that's it for this deep dive, everyone. Keep those minds curious, those hearts open, and we'll see you next time.